Welcome to Grail Country. I've been absent for a while. I decided to take a break while Sherry was on vacation in Europe. And on my return, my friend Christian Baxter of the Yours Truly podcast had this very interesting gentleman on who I decided I also needed to talk to. So James Taylor Foreman is with me today. He has a Substack that is called The Metaphor, and he wrote a quite extraordinary piece called "Why I Am a Christian Again." That I'm very glad that Christian brought onto my radar when he posted it because I hadn't seen it before. And James uses a sort of an integral, Ken Wilber integral lens to kind of analyze his own journey through his like spiritual evolution. And it's really a very interesting piece because what's extraordinary about it is that it really gets to like what a Christian epistemology looks like.
Mm.
And so that can become, so I think that people who would not be reached by other things, there's a chance that I think that James does a good enough job in pointing in the right direction, that I think that people who wouldn't be persuaded by some of the more traditional apologetics kind of content will find this interesting, because it really does like walk through the way that as you enter deeper into relationship with Christ, your thinking actually begins to change.
Mm.
And I'm a big Barfield guy. And we actually, I noticed that you quoted my friend Eugene Terrican in the piece, which I'm like, once I saw that you quoted Eugene, I knew I had to talk to you. I discovered Eugene about a year and a half ago through my friend Wayne Farrer. And I've been reading him ever since. He's been on Drill Country a couple of times. And I just think he's fantastic.
Yeah.
And so that really got my attention when I saw that you quoted him in your piece. So we kind of like this corner of the internet that I inhabit, we kind of have a sort of a liturgy that we follow, like especially the first time talking to someone, where we really just, rather than just driving immediately into like the content, we kind of like try to get to know them. So James, tell me a little bit about like how you grew up, the house you grew up in, the family you were raised in.
Wow, that's a great question. Thanks, Nate.
Yeah.
When you mentioned apologetics, I was reminded of uh, a time back closer to childhood. I grew up in Louisiana, and my mother was Cajun French, so their family was Catholic. But we were a little bit estranged from the church as a family. So when I was a teenager, I started going to the Southern Baptist Church with my friends. And I remember I was super into apologetics. That was something that I was researching a lot at the time. And when I brought it up to my pastor at the Southern Baptist Church, he was a little off put by that. It's not really a Southern Baptist thing, I guess, or maybe it just wasn't his thing. And I remember that was one of the things that kind of launched me into my atheism was that experience of kind of disdain or distrust of thought. Um, and it took me a long time to realize that that is not the essence of Christianity. In fact, that's really the opposite of the essence of Christianity. But yeah, that was what made your introduction made me think about. But I didn't really grow up I didn't grow up with any kind of strict Christian household or anything like that. We grew up pretty secular, I guess, as it happened. And finding this stuff has been, being in the church now, it has been like all the people around me that have been Christian for a long time, they're all kind of amused by how amazed I am at everything, and how transformative this whole thing is, and not just being a theory, but it kind of locks everything, mind, body, and spirit, into place. And I feel unified in a way that I haven't before. And so it's been a really fun experience, and it's not something that I like, you know, really, I experienced a little bit in childhood and then came back to it, but it's not something that I like really experienced in childhood and then got to experience again. In a lot of ways, I'm experiencing it for the first time. So yeah, that's
Was just a really quick clarification on that. So the family that you grew up in, were they irreligious or just kind of like not very churchy?
not very just not very churchy.
Yeah, that's like I was raised mostly about a good chunk of the time by my grandparents. Who my granny was from Alabama, and my grandfather, my grandpa Kyle, he was from Oklahoma. It was my paternal grandparents that raised me, and uh, they were both like definitely not irreligious. They just weren't really into the church thing. So my granny had been raised Christian Scientist, and my grandfather was just kind of like vaguely spiritual without any particular religious affiliation, but he had a favorable view of Catholics because he had been cared for. He had childhood polio and was cared for in a Catholic hospital, so he always had positive things to say about Catholics. So
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even the idea that like a Catholic hospital, the idea of hospitals and widespread medical care is a very Christian institution, and or even just like therapy being like an offshoot of going to a priest.
Yes.
It's
Yeah, they're secular priests. Yeah, that's exactly what a therapist is. Yeah,
totally.
yeah.
So are you from the South as well, or did you?
No. I was born and raised in Washington State, but just like, but my entire family is all transplanted from the South, so I'm like the first generation that was born in the North.
So you still got some of that.
Well, actually, that's not true. My dad was actually born in San Francisco. His dad was from Oklahoma. His mom was from Alabama, and my mom was from Alabama. So I have like
Alabama and Louisiana.
Alabama and Oklahoma are where most of my relatives are.
I see.
Yeah. What were you going to say about Alabama and Louisiana?
Different world down there.
Yeah.
It's a different world. Going back is always interesting. It's kind of has a different. It's like going to a different country.
Right. Yeah. So, okay, let me ask you this: what do you think of like being raised in Louisiana, which is like almost like, I mean, the South is the South, but like Louisiana is almost sui generis, really, because it's like different even from the rest of the South because it has so many different cultural influences that are unique to Louisiana. So, how do you think that influenced your trajectory as a writer?
I think it did. I had my great uncles are faith healers. Their Uncle Junior is the one that I knew, but there was another great uncle, I believe great uncle Claude was also a faith healer. And this is a very real thing. I mean, I wrote about it a little bit in an earlier piece, but of course, everybody believes in the placebo effect. It's this magical effect that seems to exist outside of measurable medicine. And you can imagine that people who were very entrenched in a belief system, you can imagine the placebo effect would be enhanced. And I mean, even the placebo effect, even that term has kind of a insinuation that it's like trivial or like some kind of like fault in our programming or something like that. But really, it's sort of the healing power of whatever spirits we align ourselves.
It's also
with.
a bit of a crutch to attempt to explain something that we don't understand, because the bottom line is we actually don't fully understand the body's healing mechanisms.
That's right. So and also we don't understand, like we have a very poor we have a very material, our world right now has a very poor understanding of immaterial effects. I mean, like, we don't understand how consciousness works. We don't really understand how economics works, or any of these, what we would call the soft sciences. We don't really understand how these things are like made and controlled, and they emerge from, spiritual egregores, and like, our personalities are sort of egregores of the different sub personalities of our psyche, and the same thing is true for societies and groups of people and things like that. Anyway, we have a really hard time. I think modern people have a really hard time understanding that, and really making systems that are good at dealing with those phenomenon. Anyway, my uncles were faith healers, and so they were good at tapping into these spiritual forces that allowed someone to, if you, and I'm almost trying to explain it from a modern framework to make sure it doesn't sound like it's crazy, but it really isn't. I mean, they allow people to heal themselves, or they allow the spirit to heal them, or like however you want to frame it. That's what they did. In fact, my great uncle would go on to University of Lafayette's Cajun French language closed circuit TV channel. Not closed circuit, but it would be local. And he would get on with a professor, and they would take phone calls of sick people, and he would speak to them, and like they would have these healing experiences, and the professor would sort of try to study it. We have all but abandoned studies like that, all these, because we think that because I don't know. There's a bunch of reasons we abandon studies like that. We don't have a Heideggerian phenomenology of the world. We abandoned that. We went with Descartes instead, and decided that we're gonna go too far into the left brain. I finished The Master and His Emissary by Ian McGilchrist earlier this year. Anyway,
Yeah.
So growing up there, I have a very strong memory of my grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary. And my mother is sort of a spiritual woman, but sort of estranged from the church, like I said. And great uncle Junior, or Uncle Junior, came up to her and grabbed her by the hand and told her that he had a dream, that she had the gift, that she would never use it, and that her youngest son had the gift, and that I'm her youngest son. And so I feel that there was like this like nest, like I was protected by this nest from the family. Like I was the youngest, I was the only son of my mother and father, and they had other kids from other marriages. It was a mixed family, and all of those people came together in one household to kind of guide me and give me a childhood that none of them had. I was very, very fortunate. I had a childhood unlike anybody else in my family, maybe going back a long time. And so I kind of stood out in that way. I had, none of us had known anybody who was a writer or done anything like that. And so, me going to college and studying philosophy, and even though it was just at the state school close by, that was sort of a strange thing. And but I was really lucky because I feel a lot of support from my family, and so that was something I felt like I could do anything I wanted, and they were proud of me, and so I just got to explore. And so I studied philosophy and kind of went down this path. And also, I really feel thankful that they, when I went down the path of being atheist and materialistic and kind of got lost there for a while, that they weren't freaking out trying to control me, that I was allowed to kind of go into my own valley and figure things out for myself and emerge on the other side with having found the gold, hopefully. So I'm kind of recounting the essay in part, but I thought it was really fun. It was really kind of a eureka moment to discover what Ken Wilber's framework, and then just to apply that to my experience was like, I just thought it was really special. It kind of made me laugh when I really kind of put it together. And
well, I think what you do with it is very interesting too, because I don't personally like Wilber's framework. And since you brought up McGilchrist, I'll say the problem with Ken Wilber's framework is that it's too left brain.
Completely.
It actually is people are going to get hung up on, it's too overly defined and categorized, and people are going to get hung up on the over definition and the categories. And there also there's this weird status thing that he's built into it.
Totally.
and so then it becomes a silly status game about who's more enlightened. Um, and so I don't, but he still has insights. That said, he still has insights. And I think the way you use the framework was really interesting, because the way you use the framework, because you combined it with this personal storytelling and this personal writing, you made it become relatable, palpable, and not just this abstraction, this abstract framework.
So, I agree. Going through some of Ken Wilber stuff, I'm kind of put off. I just think that the simplicity, I mean, I think what he did, his greatest accomplishment is the framework, kind of absent his commentary on the framework,
right,
is a culmination of, all the developmental, Maslow and or Maslov or whatever it is, and Piaget, all these developmental people. He kind of culminated all that into this one framework that's really actually pretty it's useful in a really kind of empirical way. It's just like you can
100%.
It seems to be a pretty accurate map of reality. It's not, he's very insistent on that. He's saying this is not a theory among theories. This is a map of reality. However, lower.
I think he's a good gateway to Barfield.
I haven't read Barfield
because in some ways, Barfield's ideas they're less structured than Wilber's system is, but they are more difficult to grasp. So I think if you have an integral background and then you go to read Barfield, I think you will. I'll think. Well, I mean, you're reading Eugene, right? Eugene is like Eugene is giving you a Barfieldian lens in his. So you've absorbed some Barfield, whether you've read Barfield or not through Eugene. You've definitely absorbed some Barfield, because he has a better grasp on Barfield than almost anyone else that I've met. He really gets Barfield at a fundamental level.
What do you recommend from Barfield?
Well, everyone always, like, Saving of the Appearances is his like magnum opus, and that's the one that you're going to get recommended from most people. I would recommend against starting with that.
Okay.
My recommendation would be actually an earlier work called Poetic Diction, especially since you're a writer.
Oh, nice.
Because, yeah, Poetic Diction. That's the book I would recommend starting with Barfield. You're going to get the same thing in any of Barfield's works, like. Essentially, you're going to get the same core concepts, but I think that Poetic Diction is a little easier introduction.
Okay,
at least it was for me. But yeah, Poetic Diction, and then after you've read Poetic Diction, then I would say then you want to tackle Saving the Appearances.
Okay,
and
great, because I'm doing some other Wilber reading right now, and I'm not loving it. I like it, but I don't think I need to finish.
Well, Barfield reduces everything that Wilber is talking about to just this to the simple concept of participation. Like that's right. It's like so.
Well, that's what I find missing from Wilber is and why I think that there's this sort of like detached Buddhism is his choice. Is and not to disparage Buddhism or anything, whatever, but I'm feeling like no, there's you have to kind of you can build the scaffolding that is playful and it's useful, but it's ultimately it's only a map, it's not the terrain. So you at some point you need to let it all go and participate.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I think I kind of got like the sense, like I got the sense of that, like even though you haven't read Barfield, I got the sense from reading your piece that you had an intuitive sense of like what participation is about.
Yes.
And that what you're describing is actually making the move from the mindset of withdrawal participation into a return to participation. Like it reads like someone's journey out of the withdrawal of participation into what Barfield calls final participation, which is essentially participation in Christ. I mean, Barfield was an Anglican; he was a Christian,
right? Yeah, I mean, I think I'm a little creative with Wilbur's levels, and I think level 7 for me is a little different than it is for Ken Wilber.
Yeah, your version reads like Barfield's Final Participation.
Mm-hmm.
It really does.
Well, I did.
Yeah.
I think level 7 for Wilbur is just kind of understanding. I think the linguistic breakthrough I had with Wilbur is that 7 is understanding all truth claims through time, and that helped me clarify something that I had already been thinking about, which was this participation thing. But you can, I think maybe what's missing is you have to you have to just pick something. You have to stop evaluating in the you have to stop evaluating altogether at some point and fully participate.
Yeah.
You can't
That's right, because you have to let go of the kind of knowing that puts everything within your grasp and control.
That's right. You
That's exactly what you have to not do.
right. Well, I mean, the reason you can't do this, I think it's very, very fundamental. It's not like a mystical rule that's an arbitrary rule among rules. It's very like Heidegger, like it's inauthentic to be evaluating at the same time that you're living. And so
Yeah.
in order to it's playing both sides against the middle. You're sort of lying in a very, very subtle way. And so the only way to truly be authentically participating in life, which is how Heidegger would frame it, is to let go of all evaluation and to just step into being. Which I think as Christians we're like, oh, being is Christ. That's Jung called it the self. But that's
No, right.
that's where we aim.
It's like as my friend Paul Vanderklay has put it in the past. No one can learn to swim by reading a book about swimming. At some point, you have to get in the water. But here's the thing, though, is that in actuality, that's actually how all of our knowing is.
Yes.
All of our knowing, in any meaningful sense of the term knowing, comes down to something that is borne out by an active participation with reality.
Yes. I mean, all evil is these sort of post hoc rationalizations of behavior that we cling to as a map. And I went and saw a movie last night. I'm trying to remember the name of it, Crying and Wailing or something like that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It was a movie from the 70s. You might have heard of it.
Okay. No, I haven't heard of it.
It wasn't, I wouldn't recommend it. But it was interesting. And it was this exploration of death and kind of evil. I think unintentionally. This woman was dying of cancer, and her sisters were at her house as she was passing. And there was one I think servant girl who was Christian. It was in like Swedish or something. I don't remember what language it was in. And so everybody was suffering because of their fear of death and their preconceptions of who they were. And so it was sort of like this, they were all in hell. Like all the walls were red and they were like hearing whispers and stuff like that. It was kind of an arty film. And to me, I was like, yeah, you're in hell because you're afraid to die. You don't trust the revelation of Christendom that death has been conquered. And so you're terrified of death. And so you're creating all of these, you're listening to all of these whispering egregores that are lying to you about, you should hang on to this or hang on to that preconceived notion, or if you lose this, then you lose the essence of who you are, like blah, 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 on and on. These things whisper to us. And it was just, I thought it could have been a good movie, but I thought the filmmaker was, lost him or herself. Like, you can kind of tell the difference. I don't know if that resonates with you, but sometimes you're like, oh, the filmmaker kind of had like a participatory knowing of some aspect of truth in that, and he is guiding me through this film, and it's a good film. And sometimes I'm like, this is an interesting film and it seems pretty authentic, but the filmmaker is lost. And so if I'm not careful, I can get lost too, because this is sort of this evil. I mean, this film is kind of like captured by evil. And
Yeah,
I
yeah, oh
think
yeah, yeah, and it's definitely like it's just something that you sense. It's just something you
totally.
sense. Yeah, I completely agree with that. Yeah, definitely.
My girlfriend and I talk about this all the time because we struggle with, what is good and what is bad in terms of,
Hmm.
because we take everything very seriously. We're very like meaning driven people, and we're always like, okay, this movie is good because it's violent and it's got all the stuff in it, but it's an exploration of shadow, so that's good. But I think what you're saying is correct, that you just know. You can't use the puritanical shortcut. You can't just say like, oh, if it has sex or if it has violence and blah blah blah, then it's no good.
Right.
That doesn't work, because sometimes you need to be exposed to that sort of thing with because Christ is exposed to death itself. It's like you need to be exposed to things when you need to be exposed to them, and you just have to participate. You just have to know when it's appropriate and when it's not.
Well, that's because our more. I mean, our moral sensibilities come from our moral intuition, and
Right.
it's disconnected from our formal reasoning process. So the level at which we know those things, it's just not it's not of the left brain. So I'll put it that way to put it, since you just got done reading The Master and His Emissary. It's like our moral intuition is not a function of our left brain. It is not something that you can do through formal logic, which is why when we try to develop these like complex philosophical systems of ethics, a lot of times they end up being twisted and evil,
Yes.
even though the intention behind it is good. It's kind of like, yeah, so yeah, I'll just
Yeah.
leave it at that.
Well, I heard somewhere, most philosophy is a rationalization for cowardice. And I think
Mm.
that's probably true. Um, I think most of the time you shouldn't talk. And occasionally, you know, because I look back at
That's
my
a hell of
life
a thing to say to a podcaster. But
well, I think, yeah, I don't know what exactly I meant by that, but
no, I think you're right. I don't disagree at all. That's right.
I think
You know
most of what
why?
most,
You want
yeah,
me to tell you why? Okay.
sure.
Because if you're hyper focused on talking, then all you're doing, then there is always a lack of intention on your part if all you're doing is like waiting to say the next thing,
Right.
and you're doing inadequate listening.
Right. Right. And I mean, we it's amazing. It's amazing to me how to explore how evil works, and to understand, to kind of clock within myself how many structures of protecting my ego I have built over the years. They're very habitual. I'll avoid in this way, or I'll exaggerate in this way, or I'll disconnect from my body, or whatever ways that I do that. Um, it's so insidious, because the first few times you did it, it was a choice. But long ago you've forgotten that choice, and now you're just sort of living in its wake. You've habituated it, and now it's become second nature, and it's why it's so, and also it might have been habituated by by your parents or their parents.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so we really do bear the sins of our fathers. And but I think on the other side of that, what feels like a great injustice, how unfair that, something that we started a long time ago that we don't even remember still carries around, we still carry with us as a machine of keeping us in hell. Like, it's very frustrating. I've done 12-step programs, and that the whole thing about those programs is that you're sort of you're doing a confession process where you're going through and you're finding all of these little machines of habitual sin, and you're sort of releasing them, um, and kind of getting back to pure intentionality, as much as that's possible, and then living the 12th step, which is just like every time you feel something enter your purview, and you twist it into something that's a lie, that you have the tools in order to untangle it and just kind of get back to homeostasis, hopefully close to pure attention. But what I was saying is the flip side of that injustice of feeling like how unfair that we have to bear the sins of our fathers, and not only our sins that we don't remember and maybe our parents' sin and their parents' sin, but the sins of all of humanity sort of rest on our shoulders in a weird way. Like cosmically, we sort of exist at the nexus of everyone that's ever existed. And that's like true in the Einstein relativity sense. So that's true for every person, in a strange way. Every point has to have a frame of reference.
Well, it's built into the structure of what a person is. Like a person is inherently a relational existence. Like you can't,
right.
Like the entire notion of the absolute individual is just nonsense. It's a nothing. It's a nothing. Such a being, if it was even possible for such a being to exist, would be nothing.
Right. I mean, it's like it was a shorthand for some kind of like economic theory. It was
right.
It's like that's all it was for, but we've really taken it seriously. I mean, also, and to kind of to complete that thought from a second ago was it's having the sins of all of our fathers on our shoulders is a massive opportunity as well, because it's all the shadow energy that we can unleash in our own personal lives, and I think that you see that in the Christ is like, by taking on the world's sin, it's like a lot in a miraculous amount of things can happen in your purview, and I think that that's still true. Anyway, yes, the individual. It's. I mean, I think it's an interesting development that that every person has equal value, or everybody is equal in the eyes of the Lord. I think is something that was a miraculous development and in a psychotechnology that just didn't exist for most of humanity. But I think when you start to worship that, you really get in trouble. And I do think that we worship that in the modern world.
Yeah. So I want to backtrack to your family having a history of having these faith healers really quick. How many times have you told people that and they have responded by telling you that their family also has a history of faith healers?
Not often.
Yeah. So my maternal great grandmother, my mom's granny, Faulkner. She moved to Alabama from Oklahoma, so it's another Oklahoma tie there. But she was healed of blindness like around the time of the beginning of the early Pentecostal movement in Oklahoma, and after she was cured of blindness, she became a tent revivalist and faith healer.
Wow.
So, what's the faith healers in your family like? Were they part of any particular religious tradition, or?
I believe they were Catholic.
They were Catholic.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. We're French, so
right.
We have.
So that's like a kind of Catholicism that this is one of the things that's very different about Louisiana, right? Because it's like, yeah, you have Catholics in Maryland too, but they're not deep. But there's not that deep connection to the kind of like the old country folk religion that you see in what you're talking about, right?
Yes, I'm piecing some things together that I heard. So some of this might be a little incorrect, but my understanding is that the Acadians went to the Acadians lived in Canada. This are French Canadians, and the English won that skirmish or whatever, and forced them all the way down to Louisiana. And so that's where Cajuns come from. They're the Acadians. And so there was a French population in Louisiana about 100, 200 years ago. And my family, for the most part, were French people living in Meaux, France, which is a small town outside of Paris. And they for some reason, they knew that there was French people living in Louisiana, so they immigrated there.
Oh, interesting.
Yes. So it's
Oh,
kind of a yes. So it's kind of a strange story.
so brought the kind of folk Catholicism that you will find that you would find in Europe in the past, and brought it
Right.
over. Yeah, it's that kind of folk religion is like very rare in North America because it is a country that is the United States and Canada both really are basically countries that are a post-modernity, I mean, not postmodern, but after the beginning of modernity and after the beginning of the Protestant Reformation projects. So they're
Right.
fundamentally modern and Protestant, and modernism is effectively directly connected to Protestant religion.
Yes. I no.
And so to find and so to so when you're this is one of the reasons Louisiana is so strange, right? Because there you have an encounter with something that is from a very different sort of world.
Yes.
There are some other places, there are some other pockets of the country where you have that too, where you have you have that in Appalachia, where you have some of the old world folk belief that comes out of Scotland and Ireland that kind of like have remained.
Yes. I wrote a little. I did a little research, and I wrote a little thing about the story. What's the name of that song? What's the name of that song? House in New Orleans. What's that?
Oh yeah,
Sorry.
House of the Rising
House
Sun.
House of the
Yeah,
Rising Sun. Yes, there you
yeah.
go. That song comes from those folk people in Appalachia, and we actually don't know where that song comes from. It's sort of a like a collectively generated myth song that
Right,
that has been passed down,
right.
and it probably originated in Scotland. Um,
Oh,
so.
interesting.
hmm
That's interesting. How old is it? Like the best guess is how old is that song?
I would have to go back and check. It's people don't really know, but it sort of never really started. It just emerged. And it's a song about hell, so it's
Mm-hmm.
and it's very archetypal sort of song. Very good
Yeah.
song.
Oh, it's a great song. Yeah.
Mhm.
Wait, do you have a favorite? Do you have a favorite rendition?
I you know um I mean I like the animals one. That's the most famous
Oh yeah,
one
yeah,
probably, but Nina Simone does one that I
yeah,
think
yeah,
is
yeah.
really
Okay, first of all,
really.
yeah, it's just if Nina did it, then Nina owns it.
Yeah, no, that one for sure. No, that one is very
Yeah,
haunting.
yeah,
Recommend that one.
yeah.
And then there's a
Absolutely.
kind of a modern indie one that I like by Alt J. Uh,
Okay.
it's probably a little uh, what would you say, like profane in its modernness, but I think I was like that was the age that I kind of came of age when music like that was out, so I really like that one.
So, what? So you kind of like let's see. I'm gonna kind of like go back over the highlights of like your backstory here so far. So, raised in a household that is like not atheistic or materialist, but not particularly church going,
Right.
which is kind of similar to my own background, so I can relate to that. And then you start going to a Southern Baptist church, and then and then the Southern Baptist church in your part of the country. And I don't think this is universally true of Southern Baptist. Certain types of Southern Baptists definitely. It's certainly true of the Pentecostalism that I grew up in. Is that there's just like it just has a very anti-intellectual
Yeah.
bent, and a general suspicion of reading any book that's not the Bible. Um, so and then so that turned you off. And then how long after that did like how tell me how you ended up becoming an atheist? Like how did that happen?
Um, I kind of I write about it a little bit, I think, but I don't think I really go into that particular. No, I don't go into that particular transformation. I think,
Now you just mentioned reading Dawkins.
yeah, I think I remember where I was sitting when I decided I was in I grew up in this. I went to school at this Silliman Institute. It was this big old plantation
Right.
building, private school, and it was a Civil War hospital. It was a women's college. It's like 200 something years old, and so I went to that school, and I was sitting in the auditorium, um, and I was listening to our principal or something like that. I was 16 years old, and I said to myself, "Oh no, I don't believe in God." It was that sudden for me.
Just like that, just like that. Was there anything was there any, like, just in an instant like that, or was there something you were thinking about that led you to that?
I think the only thing that had held me on was the social pressure, and so I remember that instant very clearly because I remember feeling like nobody would like me, because I didn't believe in God. So it was that instant was like uh, emotionally salient to me because I was afraid of the social cost.
Right. So this is interesting. So this is like, so you're talking about something that's like just a very sincere conviction, because you're not wanting this thought. It's just somehow it's come to you, however it's come to you.
Right.
And you're worried about the damage to your social capital from people knowing that you think this way. How long was it before you decided to let people know that that's what you thought? And, like, is there anything more you can say about the process that, like, led you to this realization that you no longer believed in God?
I had this. I mean, everything's so interconnected.
Yeah.
And I've thought about it a lot, but I, I I had kind of a normal upbringing, but then my parents got divorced, so
Mhm.
there was turmoil when I was about 9, and I lost my friend group, basically shorthand for what really happened. And I became best friends with this kid, Alex, and Alex was the smartest kid I'd ever met at that point in my life. And we were kind of like into the like goth scene, and like it was like, but it also had like an intellectual bent to it. And
Mhm.
so like Alex was like well read for a child, and kind of like introduced me to a lot of stuff that I didn't know about before. And um, he was the reason I was interested in apologetics, and we would have discussions about that kind of thing. And I was a little bit, he was a little bit. I don't know what happened to him in his childhood or whatever. I wasn't really privy to that, but he was a little bit more bitter and hard nosed, and I was kind of naive and wide eyed, and so he kind of like was this like Virgil character to me.
Mm.
And
What kind of stuff was he reading?
he read a lot of history, and his parents lived in this giant plantation home as well, and like big beautiful house, and they were like, his dad was a doctor, and so they always had books around. And I guess he would read a lot of history, and um I'm not sure. uh
Mhm.
yeah, I'm not sure. um that would be good to ask him, actually. He's studied at I think he's still teaching at University of Chicago. Anyway, um so Alex, yeah, so we would hang out, and he kind of introduced me to this world. And um I think I got it in my head that the smarter you were, the more you were worth. I think
Okay.
that was what entered
Okay.
my skull. And so
Right.
I wanted to fit in and stuff like that. And but I had already had trouble fitting in because I was just kind of, I probably like had, you know somebody might diagnose me with autism these days. I wouldn't recommend that, but that might happen if I was a child today. Um, I just, I had a little bit of trouble with like social stuff. Like I remember pep rallies was something that we did where we would all cheer for the football team. And I was really like, I wasn't being cynical. I was just really genuinely confused by the ritual. And I would try to ask people like, what are we doing exactly? And everybody was annoyed by that question because it takes you out of participation.
Right.
And so I was very scared and
Yeah.
confused that everybody was annoyed by that question. I didn't understand why everybody didn't want, because they were doing it, so they must be able to explain why they're doing it, but they couldn't, and
No.
they couldn't explain it, and they were annoyed if you asked. So
Right.
that was terrifying to me. That was really scary to me, and I didn't have the tools to think, oh, I'm smarter than these people, and there's like sheep or something. I was just afraid. I didn't have any tools to kind of like pop myself off of that. Um, And so when I met Alex, I kind of started getting some of those tools, and slowly let that take over my personality. And even though I still was, I'm a sweet kid. Like I was a sweet kid, and so I still had that. I didn't want to go all the way to this like bitter side
Mm.
of things. But I just remember when I turned 16, I was just like, I had read a little bit, and I thought that the style of Southern Baptist thought was just like, it wasn't as smart as other thought that I had encountered. And so I thought they were just wrong. And so I thought not admitting that they were wrong would be cowardly.
Mhm.
And so that moment when I was 16
And
was
you
just
had
like,
no other framework for any other Christianity other
no,
than that. That's all you knew, right?
right.
Because you were never part, like, even though you were technically from of a Catholic background, you had no connection to that. So,
Yes.
but yeah, that
Yeah,
makes sense.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I went to college, and I read a lot, and I met a lot of like really embittered philosophy professors, um,
So
who,
really, this is like what it is like you essentially had two different worldviews that you had information about, and you could compare either the Southern Baptist worldview framework that you had from the church experience of your youth, or you could have this like materialist atheist framework that you'd encountered through your friend. And of the two, you found that there was more weight on the materialist atheist side of the argument.
yes.
Is that basically right?
Yeah, I think I would, I would just, yeah, I think that's right. I mean, if you need to sum it up, I think that's right. I think I just feel I like have emotions about summing it up, but I think that that's just because I'm
What do
still
you
kind
think
of.
was going on? What do you think was going on in your reaction to it though? Like when you described that, like when it first dawned on you, oh, I really don't believe in God. What was your feeling about that? Was it
About God, and like God
no? Like,
specifically.
how did you feel about that? What was your reaction to the experience of that feeling? It's like, what was going on? What was going on? What was your reaction to that?
I
Was
it
there any
was
sense of loss? Was there any sense of loss, or was just like, I mean, you described the sense of dread of losing social capital if people knew that thought there was no God. But was there anything else that was associated with that?
I no,
Okay.
I actually to this day struggle with God,
Hmm.
because I remember as a kid when I believed in God as a kid, it was like, okay, like God does all good things, and anything that I perceive as bad is actually not bad because God has a plan, and I'm just like, I just accept that. Like I didn't care to struggle with it. I just was like, okay, God is good. Like you know, and I would just like, I think I'm good at dissociating from my own like
Hmm.
feelings. And
Hmm.
so like anytime I had a thought that was like, this is bad, I would just be like, well, that doesn't matter because like a billion people have tried to figure out this out before you. What are the chances that like you being upset about your cat dying is like a, a compelling argument for the like for God being like unwise? It's just like I basically was just like telling myself to suck it up. And so I didn't have this like Israel wrestle with God relationship with God. And so losing him was just like, I was just like, whatever. I just
Okay.
didn't. Yeah.
Right. So you just had this sort of like base level assumption that's like that. Okay. That makes sense. So that's interesting for me because that's interesting for me because um I suppose like I believed in God like sort of naively like that when I was like really young because that's just what I was told and I just kind of repeated what my parents told me and so I mean I didn't have enough intellectual capacity to question it at a really young age, but I was agnostic by 11. But here's the interesting thing is that I was never an atheist.
Hmm.
I was never an atheist. In fact, for most of my early adult life, I was militantly agnostic. I actually thought the atheists were as arrogant as convinced religious people because I just didn't think certainty was a thing that was on the table for human beings.
Hmm. I think I was like, to me, I was convinced by the atheist argument. It's like the atheist kind of make me feel like believing in God is arbitrary.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't believe like Dumbledore is God. It's like I don't have to like argue with people who think that,
Right.
um, because it's arbitrary. And
Right.
so like believing in Yahweh is just like arbitrary. It's like why would I?
Right.
It's like yeah, maybe Yahweh is God, but
Yeah.
like why would I even argue with you? Because it's just completely arbitrary,
Right.
you know. But I don't think that anymore. But I think I was
Right.
taken by that argument.
No, but I think though. But here's the thing, though. If you're in, like, if your image of God is like basically, like an anthropomorphized bearded dude in the sky, right?
Hmm.
Or any form of being among beings, then
Totally.
that's an effective way of like that. I mean, the atheist argument stands because but the problem is that that's not the kind of God that any religious tradition has ever been actually describing. Well, okay,
Right.
there are some there are some people who belong to religious traditions who genuinely do think a lot about God along those lines. But they're just usually just very naive, unsophisticated folks.
Well, and the fundamentalist Christians are just as naive and unsophisticated as the atheists in this regard, because
Yes.
they among other things, among like a alert allergy to intellectualism and things like that, they don't accept that that the discovery of Yahweh was well underway in like Mesopotamia and Greece, and like that what 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 the Hebrews did was was to sort of discover and worship the creator God, which was what other tribes were attempting to do.
Right.
And but like those gods are also real, but they're just lower, perhaps part of lower principalities. And then like what Christ does is it unifies all these things and sanctifies them. So it's like it's not that these other gods are arbitrary and not real and ours is real. It's like all of it's real.
Right.
And
Yes, exactly. But which obviously, yeah, which is why that whole atheist argument is like about just disbelieving in one God more. It fundamentally just doesn't understand the divine.
exactly.
Yeah.
All of it's real. It's just it's what yeah, all of it's real and what but once I think it's easier to get away with worshiping a lower principality if you don't know about uh the one. Because I think there's in reality, reality is more forgiving when you're ignorant than
Mhm.
if you intentionally sin.
Right.
So, but it's all real.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So you didn't really like deeply read yourself into atheism or anything like that. It's just sort of like just kind of this like gradual dawning. So what was the first thing? Do you remember the first
Well,
thing that happened? What was the first thing that happened that made you start to doubt your atheism?
well, just to one of the comments. I also, I mean, I was reading. I was really interested in like astronomy and science,
Mhm.
and so I was reading like. I mean, I guess yeah, I guess it seeped in. I didn't even really notice that I was reading, and it was, but I was reading like Stephen Hawking, like uh, the what is that? A Brief History of Time, and Michio Kaku, and people like that that were these physicists, and I don't know. I was just really, I still like I'm a science fiction guy. Like I still kind of
Mhm.
get like it's a good place to me for me to get awe. So that stuff was seeping in, but I wasn't going like I wasn't looking at the text and being like they think this and that goes against what I think. It just was kind of seeping into my milieu, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, it
Uh,
does.
so anyway, and then so that was at 16, and then for probably 10, 11 years, I maybe 9 years I would have identified as an atheist, and then I started getting spiritual because I had psychedelic experiences and
Is that what was that the thing that was the trigger? Was the like your first psychedelic experience was like kind of like that's what I'm looking for is like if there was any kind of moment where it's like, oh, maybe there's more to this reality than I suspected. Like, where was that? Like, or was it just also sort of a gradual process?
It was also gradual. I
Okay.
mean, I started to, I mean, every time I outline it, it's a little bit different because it was very, it was a very long gradient. But I think I started to, through spiritual or kind of more new age stuff, I started to think that, you know, there is higher principalities than just the material, which I had suspicions about. But I think I think I was really obsessed with this, like Daniel Kahneman, or you know, uh, Freakonomics, or just like this very modern, like any sort of like Gestalt phenomenon, we can explain away by, if we just talk long enough, we can tell you
Right,
why.
right, right.
And so I was really like, I thought I was really clever because I could just, if anybody was like, well, I think this, and I go, well, actually, that's a Gestalt phenomenon, and it's caused by this, and that. Like, it was probably obnoxious and hard to be around, but that was kind of what I was into, and I thought it would save me. And so then that slowly started to give way to like woo woo spirituality and like manifest stuff, and like I started thinking that stuff. I started noticing that Gestalt, you know, uh, this is kind of post hoc, but there's a thinker called Eric Hoyle on Substack. You've probably seen,
Hmm.
um, and he talks about downward causality with Gestalt phenomenon. I don't forget, he has a current coin term for it, but basically his idea is that, like, he studies consciousness, and so because the consciousness to him is a Gestalt phenomenon. But the reason you can't explain it away is because it can have downward causality. So like your personality can cause material, it can have material causal effects. It's not just a sort of like bottom up material. I don't know. Anyway, um, I
Yeah,
think that's
we
a post
create
hoc.
we create worlds. That's
Right.
just that's what it means to be a person.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, that's just like
it's a question whether it's just a question of the nature of the incarnation that you're going to have. It's like,
right.
is it going to be a false incarnation, or is it going to be a true incarnation?
Right.
But you're going to
Um,
create a world.
exactly. So I started noticing that, and I started reading about that stuff, and like, Ram Dass and, um, Alan Watts and stuff like that. I started reading those fellas, and got really into that, going to meditation retreats and doing psychedelics. And I was never like a druggie or like a burnout. I just was trying
Yeah, most
to,
people who experiment with psychedelics don't become drug addicts. It's just like,
yeah,
first of all, they're non-addictive,
yes,
and only very. I mean, I there are, like, occasionally you will discover a rare personality that, like, will do psychedelics and then immediately want to do it again. But that's unusual because usually they're not entirely comfortable. And it's like you need time to process a psychedelic experience. You're not wanting to rush out, just go do it again. And in the
no,
case of LSD, you can't even. Like, if you try to dose LSD 2 days in a row, they won't do anything for you.
yes, and that was my experience. I hated it. Like, the only reason I did it was because I was seeking. I was a seeker,
Mm.
and so, but I never had a psychedelic experience. This might be not entirely true, but it's close to true. I never had a psychedelic experience where I didn't go to hell.
Mm.
And I did a bunch of them, probably like 12. Um,
Explain what you mean by go to hell. I want to hear that.
um, I had my, I still have, I'll get sweaty if I think about it. I had my, all perception basically that adults experience is memory. So you don't really see the computer in front of you. You don't really hear me. It's all just memory. You learned English, and you learned, how people talk. You just learned a bunch of stuff over a very long period of time. And your perceptions are squeezing all of that raw data into your categories. Um, and so you're not really able to perceive reality, in its raw form.
Right,
Nor would you want to.
because our frames constrain our perception.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So like when I'm saying something to you,
Which is, by the way, that's I saw your piece on the angels, and it's like that's why the angels are covered in eyes, because
right.
because for them knowing and seeing are a single act, and their perception is total. That's
Right.
why. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, okay. Yeah. Good. That's nice. Yes. So, what was I saying about going to hell? And so but I think being exposed to your dead wood. So like a lot of us are like some percentage of us is dead because we have what I was talking about earlier. We have these habitual sin frameworks to keep us.
If we're not a saint, if you're not a saint, which very few of us are, I think you can pretty much universalize that. There's lots of dead wood in basically in 99.9% of the population. I don't know. Maybe I'm being skeptical about how common saints are.
No, I think that's probably right. And so whenever I would have I think that I'm a particularly stubborn, or maybe like I can't look away from a car crash type of individual. Like I think some people can take psychedelics and just have a nice experience and not experience their deadwood.
Yeah, I'm not one of those people.
But I experience it, and it's because that's just what I'm like. I don't know. I don't have the words to explain it, but that's basically how it goes for me. And so I have these terrifying, harrowing experiences where I get exposed to not only my sins, but the sins of all of humanity.
Right. Well, this might have something to do with your family history of like of your ancestors telling you that you had a spiritual gift. So if you're someone who has a spiritual gift, and then you go knocking on spiritual doors that maybe shouldn't be open, you're probably going to be more inclined to have a bad time than someone who isn't.
That sounds plausible to me. But it was so terrifying that I thought that if it went on, that I would need to die. Like there's just no way that a person could tolerate that. It's disorienting beyond belief. I just don't know how to explain, because you can't, because even the very act of me having words to explain something, me using English right now, is comforting. But imagine if all of that's blown out, if you're just like lost, and you're an amoeba in an ocean, and you have nothing to grab, and you're just caught in your own web of suffering. I don't know. There's no words for it. It's interesting that oh my God, a lot of thoughts come to mind. But anyway, yeah, that was like hell for me.
Yeah, I actually, like, some of my worst experiences actually were just with marijuana. Like, not even like more powerful psychedelics, but I never had an experience of hell, but I did have demonic encounters, like fairly consistently. And the way that would manifest would be that people would be talking to me, but I would see the face of a demon, and they would be saying words that have a meaning on one layer, but the meaning that I would understand would be a metaphorical or symbolic meaning on another level. So it'd make it seem like they were saying something other than what they were. And what the demons were always communicating was something designed to make you come into a feeling of hopelessness.
Yes. That's really fascinating that you say that. It reminds me of the Genesis story where God says you can have any tree in the garden except for that one, and then Satan says, or the snake says, God said you couldn't have any tree, or you couldn't partake in any tree, and it's sort of like that is the words God used, but it's like got this twist on it.
Right, exactly. Yeah, no, that's precisely what the experience was. It's like there's this there's just straightforward communication. And this is like, we're talking like my friends. Like this is like the faces of my friends. It's like demons are talking to me through the faces of my friends. And the words that my friends are using have a subtext that is like not what their the plain meaning of their words is. That just fills me with dread and hopelessness. And yeah, I mean that's
I've had
that was the consistent pattern.
I've had similar experiences on marijuana. I wouldn't see things like that, but I would get extremely paranoid that everybody that I was talking to was like irredeemable and hopeless, and that I was hopeless.
Yeah.
And that I had some really bad experiences on weed as well. I think it's I think it's I hate weed, and I think
I hate it. Can't stand it.
I think it's pretty evil. I think it's like a very evil substance. I have a particular vendetta against it, so I could be wrong, but that's my feeling about it. Anytime I smell it, I roll my eyes and I feel like it.
But I don't think most people don't. I don't think James. I don't think most people's experience with it matches up with ours. Right?
Why do you reckon?
I think it really does have something to do with what you were told by your family, like that you have a gift. It's like, this is not for you, right? Because you're meant to connect to the spiritual world in a different way, not through that. Not through that.
Interesting.
So that's what I would. That's my best guess. So
I like it. It at least gives me some comfort.
Yeah,
because I hate weed.
Yeah, not even remotely tempted by it ever.
No. I remember one of the last times I did it. I stared at my TV for 3 hours, and not because it was on, because I just couldn't figure out how to work the menus, and I was having like demonic thought loops. I was like, I'm just not going to do this again. Not good.
Yeah. All right. So what was when you decided to, when did you, okay, so we talked about like you going through this kind of new age phase, psychedelic experimentation. When did you start to think that you need to take a look at Christianity again?
Right. So I started getting into, like I said, all that, read Alan Watts, and I got deeper and deeper into that. Was still pretty miserable. And then I started reading about, myth. I read Maps of Meaning.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
All right.
And then that woke me up pretty good. I think that's a great.
So you're one of the people that Jordan got to.
Oh yeah.
Okay. There's a lot of them. I have a video on Jordan. It's funny because there's so many people that just don't want to acknowledge that positive, the undeniably positive effect that he had in the lives of so many, particularly young men. And it's just like, I know too many people who have been like brought back to their faith or entered into faith like directly through that Peterson gateway, to think that like that there's not something to what he's doing. So
right. I mean, I heard on Christian's podcast, I listened to the Jordan Hall, and Jordan was at Harvard when Peterson was there, and he read some of his essays, which is so funny.
Yeah, it is.
But I still like, if Peterson interviews somebody interesting, I'll listen to it. But I Peterson's like original work and thought around, his interpretation of Jung, and I read Heidegger as well, and Peterson didn't read Heidegger, and kind of read him post hoc and like realized that they had discovered a lot of the same things, but Heidegger had a similar effect on me. But I think Peterson was the gateway because the way he spoke was salient to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I read Maps of Meaning, and I started becoming like Jewish. Like I just was like, like these stories are important somehow. And so I started reading the Old Testament, and you know.
My wife's Jewish, by the way.
Okay, yeah, great. And then at some point, I was like, oh, I was just coming to Christ just happened to me. Like it was just something that it was something. In fact, I had a dream because I was reading Peterson and all that, and Vervaeke and like Paju and all that. But I had a dream that I was in Peterson's attic, and he was in his house below me with his family, and there was a gap in front of me, and I needed to cross over to the other side, but I was really afraid that I would fall into his house. Um, and when I woke up from that dream, I felt like, and so ever since then, I'm like Peterson for whatever reason he's done him. I would never disparage him because he helped me a lot, but I don't think that he can go across this gap. I don't think that he can lead me across this gap.
Mhm.
I don't think that. I think Peterson is maybe knows too much, maybe has studied too much to really participate in Christ, and I don't need to know as much as Peterson in order to participate in Christ. Um, and so I can kind of let go, and so that's more where that's more my path, and my path is not his, and so I think that
Mhm.
that would dream what that's what that dream was telling me.
That's interesting. Although I don't know, he's. I don't know if I agree. I mean, my problem with Peterson compared to what he was doing back then, compared to Peterson now, is that I just really don't like the political pundit mode at all. It's not my. I'm a
Yeah,
Christian anarchist. I don't vote. I don't. I hate everything about our national politics. I don't have a side in it. I just don't. I just don't like it, and I just think that that kind of like political punditry is just beneath him. Like like his contribution to the culture is degraded by choosing that path. So
I
I know he
agree.
still does other work too, but it's just I wish he just would 100% focus on the work that I think he's best at, which is not which is really transcends politics. It really
Yes,
does. When he's at his best, it's not political. For all the people who think it's political, it's not political. It definitely transcends politics. His best work. But I still have the deep respect for the man. But I do think I don't know that last. I don't. Did you hear his more recent comments on the resurrection?
I did. I just like I think his the political thing comes from the same source. I think there's a like an anger and a lack of turning the other cheek. Like I have a lot of respect for him. I would never judge in a way that I'm like saying that he should change his
Well,
behavior.
ironically, it's the Luciferian impulse that you described so well in your angels piece,
Right.
right? Like that's what it is. Like this idea that there we can some of his thinking about large language models shows signs of that kind of like no, Jordan, please don't think that. Like when he starts talking about large language models being able to help us figure out God, it's like no, don't go there.
Yeah.
And it's funny because he talks about the Luciferian impulse a lot, but that impulse right there, that is you nail it. That is the Luciferian impulse, and I think like William Blake is clearer on this than almost anybody. Like um, you cite Milton, but William Blake also is like very clear on this. Like the the intellect that is just raw intellect, it has a tendency to turn toward toward the diabolical, which is you just said you just finished McGilchrist, The Master and His Emissary,
Yeah.
which I think is also illustrative of that same thing. It's like you need head and heart together in balance.
Yes.
And Christ is the and Christ is the and Christ is the way to that, and you're not going to find it in formal logic.
No. I yes. I wrote a thing about it. I knew a man named Mary back in Louisiana. He had his left brain was gone. I
Mm,
don't some accident he couldn't remember.
okay, right.
And so he had like this imploded skull. Um,
Uh-huh.
but he was all right brain, and it was all participation
Yeah.
for him. He was just this guy that would hang out at the coffee shop, and like everybody loved him, sort of, and he was sort of enraptured by life. And he couldn't remember your name or anything like that, but like he would ask your name, and sort of it made me realize that the point of asking a name is not to learn the name, although that is a nice side effect. The point of asking a name is just sort of to say I love you, as funny as that is.
Right. Yeah, I want to know you. That's what it is.
Right.
That's why, because it's like you don't really know somebody from the name, but the asking for the name is like it's the gesture that is the invitation to come to know someone. That's what's behind the. I think you're right. The exchange of names itself is meaningless because, I mean, I don't know anything. I don't know much about you at all, and knowing that your name is James, right?
Right.
But it is an introduction. Hi, I'm James. Hi, I'm Nate. That is the opening to a conversation, and a conversation is definitely like a good conversation is a relational flow.
Yes.
You can actually come in to know someone, which is why the thing you said about like being too quick to talk is so destructive, because it makes conversation impossible.
Yes. I mean, I wonder, because I don't understand what it's like to be famous, or what it's like. I've had a glimpse of it. Very, very small thing, just like something got popular on Twitter, and I found the spiritual forces to be overwhelming. And it was just this tiny fraction of what it would be like to be famous. It was very distressing, much more than you would think, or I would think before it happened. It was intense. And so it's hard for me to say, Peterson should do this or do that. Because I'm sure the spiritual forces on him at being famous, it's like probably a full-time psychedelic experience.
Right.
That also is very alienating, because he is sort of at this pinnacle that he has no peers, and so I can't say I would do better, I think
right.
But it is sort of fun. It is easy to look at him from the outside and be like, it seems like you forgot how to listen, that like he talks, in his old lectures, he talks so much about listening to his clients. And now it's like, I feel like he has like a script of things that he knows that he kind of like, and there's less listening. Anyway, I think it's just,
he's not Joe Rogan.
Yeah, Joe. I mean, like Joe.
That's why Joe's so good at what he does, because he is a good listener,
and he keeps himself low, I think. Which is, I think it's only possible if you're just like you just see yourself as a comedian, a meathead, just like no matter what happens to you, like you're always just like bottom of the barrel. You're a comedian. I think that's helpful.
Yeah. So there was no like thunder and lightning moment, that it was just sort of like coming back to Christ was just also just sort of a gradual process.
Yeah, I think I started to think, not only I thought, oh, these stories are important, and then I thought, oh, if they're important, then they're real. Like, it's ridiculous to think, oh, we should look at them forensically to see if they actually happen. That's preposterous. That's not how you do anything. Like, you don't think about your day like that.
Right.
You think about reality in terms of what's salient, and these stories are ultra salient. They're real. They're realer than you brushing your teeth. And so I started realizing the stories were real, and then I was like, oh shit, Christ is the realest thing that there is. And I believe that intellectually. I think I'm odd, because I believe that intellectually before I believed it any other way. So in church, I notice other people are the opposite. They believe it in their heart and their soul, and they have a lot. They have a lot of doubts intellectually.
Right.
I have no intellectual doubts, but I have trouble believing it in my heart and my soul.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I'm kind of an aloof person. I just like, sometimes I feel raptured by certain things, but yeah, my girlfriend has a much easier time believing in God than I do. Like, I'm like, yeah, God's real, but like, how often do I feel that? It's like a very small percentage of my day. So like, I would say I'm still, to answer your question, I guess is a better answer is I'm still working on
Well, yeah, it's a
it. Yeah.
journey.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's your prayer life look like?
I do a lot of every morning I write the third step prayer, which is part of the 12 steps. Do you know the third step prayer?
No, I don't. I've never been in
It
12 steps.
it goes, God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and do with me what thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I might better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them might bear witness to those I would help of thy love, thy power, and thy way of life. May I always do thy will. It's a good prayer.
Very good prayer.
So I write that down in my journal every morning, and then I write about what I want to do for the day. I try to have, yeah, and then I pray over food because my girlfriend makes me, and I probably wouldn't remember otherwise, and I'm really thankful for that. And I try to say little prayers through the day.
Yeah, I think praying over food is super important. I think we underestimate like how important it is because there's something like because you're making a direct connection between your prayer routine and the material and the tangible.
Mhm.
That is real. That is really important because you're actually reflecting on the God world relationship in a simple prayer over food.
Yes.
And it's something that, and also the frequency of it looks like, if you're eating 3 meals a day, that's 3 more times a day you're praying. It's like that's what I remember watching. There was a Netflix series that focuses on some ultra Orthodox Jews that live in Israel called Shtisel that I watched with my wife, and I remember watching that and like watching the characters like consistently pray every time before they put any food or drink in their mouth. It's just like I was struck um, by the real what's the word I want to use? I don't want to say power, but I want to say the real depth to that. But there's depths in that simple action. There are real depths in that simple action because you're bringing God into these basic level material functions of our day-to-day life that reminds us that God is connected to everything we do.
Yes. I mean, that's the most fundamental issue is that heaven and earth get separated.
Right. That's right. And so like it's kind of like, and actually the act of praying over food is actually sort of like it's a good practice to build up toward the culmination of communion on Sunday, right? Because that's actually like it's a little sort of mini communion because you're remembering your relationship with God as you're bringing in food and sustenance to your body. So
Yes.
yeah, so it's a reflection on on the fact that being itself is communion.
Yes. Wow. Yeah. I think it's interesting. I think thoughts like that strike me as true, and that, but I have a very habitually materialistic
Mm-hmm.
brain,
Sure,
and it short circuits it. It like I can't,
I
I don't
gotcha.
know what to make. I don't know what to make of it exactly, but I think
Gotcha.
that it's very salient to me. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know for better or worse. I have sort of and I think it's maybe passing. Maybe I'm passing, or maybe it'll come back. I don't know, but I have a very much a fixation on explaining this stuff from like that in a way that a materialist would understand.
Right.
I think it's
No,
kind of
that's a good impulse. That's a good impulse because that's still like I mean, certainly it's cracking and it's shattering and it's falling away, but there's still a lot of people that are defaulting to that kind of materialist view, for sure.
Yes. I mean, I think that there's a lot of energy for Christianity on the other side of materialism. It was something my pastor read the piece, the Why I'm Christian Again piece, and we spoke about that a little bit. And I think it's exciting for people who have been Christian their whole lives to think, oh, maybe there's a more vital form of Christianity that could come out of this cultural thing that scared me for so long.
Well, it's an extraordinary piece, and you've done great work, and I really appreciate you coming and talking to me today. Really, it's been a wonderful conversation. It's good to meet you. I'm sure we'll have occasion to talk again at some point in the future. Is there anything like, since you wrote that, and you wrote that quite some time ago, is there anything that you have like reflected about since that like you maybe you wish you had included in the original piece that you might like revisit in the future?
I'm not sure. I haven't revisited it personally. I feel that it was a completion of something. Not to say that it was perfect, but I feel like I haven't been publishing since then because I feel like I finished with something. And that feels good. I worked on that for a while, and I have new essays a new essay series that I'm planning. I don't know when I'm going to start, but I think I'm going to change. I have changed, and I think the essay changed me. Writing the essay changed me, and I do. I mentioned that I'm fixated on explaining this in a way that a materialist will understand. But I think in a big way, I finished that. For me, I finished. I'm a little less fixated on that, and I'm trying to find out who I'm going to be on the other side of it. So,
well, I'm looking forward to seeing your future work. Are you so your next work is also going to be in the essay format?
Yes, I think I'm going to move to a little bit more.
You got some poet in you. I can tell from your prose that you do.
I mean, I was just about to say it. I think I'm going to move to a more prose and more. I think I'm going to record myself speaking it, and it's going to be, audio, text, and I think that's what's on the horizon for me. So,
oh, that's great. I look forward to your future work, James. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Nate.
Yep. Thank you for joining us on Grill Country for this conversation with James Taylor Foreman.